Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from lunch, everyone. Hope it was as enjoyable as what I found it. Folks, our first speaker this afternoon in these breakout sessions is a senior plant pathologist with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. She's been a main point of contact for Queensland growers experiencing plant disease issues. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage Lisa Kelly.
All right, hopefully you can all hear me okay. So as mentioned, I'm a plant pathologist. I work with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and I'm based in Toowoomba. So I don't work with sugarcane at all, but I do work with all of your grain crops that you're starting to play around with in your rotations. So today I thought I'd talk about some of the diseases that you're starting to see in some of your pulse crops. Primarily your soybeans are getting quite a lot of diseases, and your mung beans as well. Okay, so I'll start from the start, I guess, of Plant Pathology 101. So when we talk about plant pathogens, they're generally very specific to different plant species. So these pathogens can consist of multiple different microorganisms, but primarily we're talking about fungal pathogens or bacterial pathogens, viruses, phytoplasma, and nematodes. So when I talk about the disease triangle, it basically means that three things have to come together for a disease to occur. So the first is you need a susceptible host, so whether that's your soybeans or your mung beans. A lot of the varieties that you're growing up here are susceptible to a lot of the diseases that you're seeing. You also need that pathogen to be present. So over time, those pathogens will build up, and then you also need that favourable environment, which a lot of the environment conditions you have up here are very conducive for a lot of pathogens, particularly your fungal pathogens. So also in your sugarcane rotations, so as you're starting to grow more pulse crops, I know areas like in the Burdekin, they're growing all year round legumes, which naturally is just going to increase those disease, the amount of inoculum that's already in the air or in the soil. You've also got the ideal environment for these fungal pathogens to take off, so that really warm, humid, wet weather, and then you've got your susceptible cultivars. So when we talk about integrated disease management, it's all about trying to disrupt one of these interactions. Okay, so when I talk about integrated disease management strategies, you really need to look at a whole farm level, not individual paddocks. And then I guess there's three major aims which I'll touch on here. So the first is trying to reduce the inoculum that's in the paddock in the first place, and you do that through your agronomic practices. The second is exclusion of the pathogen from the paddock. So that's really trying to, I guess, use disease-free seed where you can and practicing good farm hygiene. And then thirdly, it comes down to protection of the host. So where you can plant resistant cultivars, varieties, and then use pesticides where possible. So with diseases, it's all about, I guess, trying to prevent the disease coming in initially or trying to minimise what's there. So once the disease is there, it's really difficult to manage. Okay, so I'll list through these major management practices. So I guess it doesn't matter what diseases you've had, or even if you haven't had any diseases, if you follow a lot of these or as many of these practices as you can, that's going to be your best course of action to prevent the disease in the first place and minimise whatever's there by causing damage. So the first is farm hygiene, so really minimising the movement of those diseases between paddocks. So making sure you're cleaning down your machinery, your footwear, just you don't want any infected soil or plant material transferring from infected paddock to a clean paddock. And just, I guess, just think about those type of things. So if you know you have disease in an area of the paddock or a paddock that has disease, just, I guess, think about when you might visit that in the day. If you don't need to go into that disease area, stay away from it. If you do need to visit it, maybe visit it last in the day so that then you can go and clean down your machinery before you go and visit your clean paddocks. And also harvest those infected paddocks last. Paddock selection, just, I guess, being aware of what diseases you've had in those paddocks previously or beside those paddocks. Crop rotation, it's all about avoiding replanting the same crop or legumes in that same paddock time after time. So ideally you want to leave at least 2 years before you replant legumes into that same paddock. And that's all, I guess, about trying to break down whatever is already existing in that soil. And then if you are having problems with specific diseases, you may want to consider switching up some of your agronomic practices. Managing weeds and volunteers, and then where possible using high quality seed. So I guess if you can get your planting off to a good start, establishment is good, it's going to be more tolerant, I guess, and fight off any diseases that come in later. Resistant varieties where possible, crop nutrition, same as, I guess, getting them off to a good establishment. The healthier the crop, the more likely they are to tolerate any diseases. Regularly monitoring the crop. So the earlier you notice those disease symptoms, the more likely you are to manage what's there and minimise its spread. There are quite a lot of fungicides available now, particularly for soybeans. I guess just keep an eye out on the APVMA website for those. And then just being aware, I guess, of what diseases are around in your area that may pose a risk to your crop. So I guess soybeans and mung beans, I'll focus mainly on those today, but they do get quite a lot of diseases worldwide. The diseases that I've been seeing mostly in soybean crops and mung bean crops in the coastal Queensland regions, so in rotation with your your sugarcane. For the soybean, you've got anthracnose, pod and stem blight, target spot and purple seed stain. And mung bean, you've generally got powdery mildew and cercospora leaf spot. So all of those are fungal diseases. So I'll touch on each of them briefly. But basically, if you follow those management strategies, as many of those as you can, that's pretty well the best way to manage these diseases. Okay, so anthracnose, it's a fungal disease. It's caused by several Coleototricum species. So these pathogens have been causing, increasing in significance, I guess, in soybean crops, particularly in the Burdekin region in recent years. So these fungi, they can infect plants at any stage of growth, but quite often you'll only notice disease symptoms when the plants are maturing, or you might only notice, they might look like they're senescing earlier than they should be. And on those dead plants, you might start to see symptoms. So there's lots of different symptoms that this disease, or these pathogens, can cause. The ones you're most likely to notice, though, is, I guess, the petioles dying off, particularly it'll start in the lower stems. And I guess when the plants are already dead, if you have a closer look on their stems, they'll have small little black dots, which are the fungal fruiting bodies that are scattered on those. And if you have a hand lens or a magnifying glass, you'll be able to see on those little black dots, they've got these little spines. So this disease, it can be confused with pod and stem blight or another charcoal rot, which is another fungal disease. This disease so the symptoms, it can cause all spots and things all over the stems, petioles, pods, and it can cause leaf symptoms as well. So back in 2019 and 2020, this disease occurred in a lot of soybean crops in the Burdekin region, alongside target spot and soybean stem fly as well. So it tends to like that really warm, wet weather, and once it's there, it will spread in the wind and via rain splash. So this pathogen, it's pretty much, it's here now, and it's surviving in pretty much your crop residues, and it will also survive in your seed. So it does have a fairly wide host range, but you're pretty safe if you're planting your sorghum, maize or sugarcane in rotation. There are some fungicides out there now that you can apply to help minimise the damage by this pathogen. I'll move on to pod and stem blight, because pod and stem blight causes very similar symptoms to your anthracnose. It's again another fungal species caused by several types of fungal species, so Phomopsis and Diaporthes species. So pod and stem blight's the main disease that has been around, particularly in the Burdekin region, in the last 2 years. But these pathogens could also cause stem canker and seed decay as well. So similar to your anthracnose, it can infect plants when they're young, and you might only see plants as pretty much when they're dead. Similarly to anthracnose, it will get those little black dots on the stems and also on the branches as well. But the main difference, I guess, is if you look at those little black dots, with the pod and stem blight, they're often in nice, neat little rows, whereas your anthracnose is just scattered. And they also don't have those little spines that anthracnose does. So this can also cause seed infection. So if you have a crop that's infected and then you get really rainy weather during harvest and your harvest is delayed, that's when your seed's most likely to be infected, and that can cause the seed decay side of the disease. So similar to your anthracnose, it really needs that warm, wet weather. So basically, if your plants are maturing during, that really wet period, that's when they're most at risk to get that yield impact. So like the anthracnose, it'll survive in your crop residues and in the seed, and it'll spread via rain, splash and wind. So I guess if you have had these diseases, just be really wary about replanting that seed, and try and rotate with crops that don't host these diseases, such as your sugarcane, sorghum or maize. Target spot's another fungal disease that's been around for a few years, but it's probably, it hasn't been quite as bad in the last 2 seasons compared to the 2019 season was quite bad. So this fungus will produce more of a leaf spot symptom, but it can cause spots on your pods and petioles and stems as well. I guess the leaf spot symptoms, as the lesions age, they can sometimes get concentric rings on them, hence the name target spot. So this pathogen, again, really needs that persistent wet weather. So if you have dry weather, the disease will pretty well just sit there and won't get any worse. It will also spread in the wind and rain splash, and this pathogen will survive in your soils for more than 2 years as well. Purple seed stain is the other soybean disease I was just going to touch on. So this disease pops up now and then, but it's probably particularly bad when you have that wet period during when you're wanting to harvest. So you have those purple or pink patches on the seed coat. So yeah, when you have that warm, wet weather during flowering, that's when you're likely to see the most disease caused by purple seed stain. So it's actually the same pathogen that causes your Cercospora leaf blight that'll cause your seed stain as well. So with your Cercospora leaf blight, that's when you have the bronzing or purpling of your leaves. So similar to your other pathogens, it'll survive in your infected seed and in your crop residues, and spreads via wind and rain splash. There's lots of other diseases that you're likely to see in your soybeans at some point, but usually they don't cause massive damage. So just, I guess, some of the images there, you've got some sclerotinia, I don't know if that works. So sclerotinia in a seed sample that came from last season. That one was from the Burnett region, and that's another sclerotinia image. So sclerotinia is a disease you really don't want up here. So it's got a really wide host range, so lots of different crops will get sclerotinia, and those sclerotes can survive in your soil for like decades. I'll just touch, oh, sorry. Okay. So just a slide just to show you the list of chemicals or fungicides that are currently registered or under permit for soybeans. So yeah, I guess just be wary of the withholding periods on all of those, and just check the labels to see when's the best time to spray for the different diseases. Just touch briefly now on mung bean diseases. So powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is caused by two different fungal species. It's pretty much wherever mung beans are grown in Australia, they will get powdery mildew. So it's an airborne disease, and it's living on, surviving on living hosts all the time. So it's not surviving in your seed or in your soil. It's just blowing around in the wind. So this disease, it's pretty much managed through fungicide applications. So you've got tebuconazole and Viridis octi as your options to control this disease. And I'll just mention there is an app, if you like apps. It's just powdery mildew MBM. So that's just another tool, I guess, to use to help make those fungicide management decisions. And then Sarcospora leaf spot is just another disease that mung beans get. So it's pretty common in crops grown up in coastal Queensland. Pretty much you'll have spots, largely spots on your leaves, but if it is severe, it can cause defoliate those leaves and cause spots on your petioles and pods as well. All right, and then a number of other diseases you're likely to see at some point in your mung beans. Pretty much if you have any samples that you're not sure of, feel free to contact myself. So I've just got my contact details there. Feel free to take a photo or jot them down if you wanted to send samples to me. And that's about it. I'll just finish off with just some further resources there. Thank you.
Fantastic, Lisa. We've got time for maybe one, maybe two very quick questions if anyone's got them. Otherwise, we're under the time pump. Yes, down the back. Or just before you ask, sorry, just through the microphone because we are streaming as well, so the question gets through. Thanks.
Sorry, Lisa, can you just go back one slide so we can actually get those details?
Yeah, sure.
It's quite quick.
Very cool. And ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to contact Lisa with any questions that you have or anything like that. She's only too happy to help. Folks, would you please thank Lisa for us? All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on with our next speaker. This man is a wet tropics grower. He owns and operates TNT Farm Techniques Proprietary Limited. And more importantly, Tony has won the Prince's Trust Australia Environmental Leadership Reef Sustainability Award for applying his scientific skills on farm. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please make a warm welcome for Tony Rossi.
No, I'm happy with this, yeah. Well, great to be able to talk to you all here. Yeah, I'm really happy to start with this slide here. This is brothers and old dad, and we've farmed on the Mulgrave River. Started like a lot of people here, cane cutters way back, and yeah, old dad passed last year, but he had a great life, and he taught us all to work hard. And I guess amongst us all there's fitters and fitter and turner, diesel fitters, and I sort of brought a bit of science when I left the mills and came back to the farm. So there's 3 of us work on the farm these days, but no, we get on pretty good. I often think back to the days of the first mechanical harvesters. There's old Robert, Uncle Robert there with the 515. And, you know, when the first harvesters came out, not everyone got mechanical harvesting. And I see that as the first step change. And after a while, and actually Mulgrave became the first one in the world to be all fully automated. Then we went on in the north here. We moved to green cane and trash blanketing. And that was a major step change. And not everyone got that either straight away. So I see this whole regen movement now as probably the 3rd step change. And a lot of people aren't getting it. And we all know that. There's probably less than 10% in each mill area that are interested in progressive things. But I know I've got a bit to get through here, so I will move on. Now, the thing that sort of got us interested in it all was we'd started doing courses with David Hardwick, Digging Deeper, and we came across a Commonwealth grant here. It was the Reef Trust grant, and we... has this got a little spotter on it too? Or is it that little palm tree? Oh, yeah. Look, here I'll just point out that's sort of a North Queensland wet tropics industry standard. But so we went from 140 down to 80, and it was a reverse tender, so you're not allowed to say what you got for it all. But basically, the money allowed us to buy some GPS heads and a lot of these little instruments. A lot of these little machines. And so then we went about making compost because we thought, well, we're going from 140 down to 80, we need some more nitrogen sources. And compost does have that, but a later slide will show you the real gift of compost is the organic carbon of it. So when you first get into composting, you realise there's a lot of materials handling. So you usually try and pick a corner of the farm where there's a lot of shorts. Anyone that's ever driven a harvester, they just drive you nuts there. So that one's about 2 acres. And what you can see there is the windrows of the compost. And you like to bund it all up and you have a leachate tank. And so, you know, we've had 10-inch events and everything's contained in that. And it's great not to have many neighbours either. Oh, yeah, how do you go back? I think one goes back. Yeah, not having neighbours is good too. So, but the other thing with composting, you can go broke doing it. So the real key is trying to get cheap raw materials or free stuff. So in every council area, this is all the what they call green waste. So that's everyone's palm trees from their backyards that's been bowl ground. So we buy that at a pretty good price. We've got other products like mill mud. Well, we've all got access to mill mud. The mill mud trucks love it because they're not having to go into wet paddocks. We get all our mill mud and put it into this composting system. So that's what I'm sort of saying, that a materials handling area is really good. This is the biosolids. It's had a bit of rainwater in it, but this is the treated sludge from the effluent plants. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And wouldn't like to fall in it, but it's free and it's a great source of a lot of nutrients in there. But it's not, you don't need to use it. There's cane bagasse. Now we know most of our mills can't get rid of their bagasse fast enough, so we've got an agreement with Mulgrave where they bring it rather than stop in the mill, and we end up with a fairly good pile of bagasse, which is a great material too. And then things like cane trash, all your spilt billets at the points, anything like that. Yeah, it all just goes into the mix. So I've got a little video here. I know a lot of you have been up to our area, but this one just shows you a couple of the little Reef Trust machines. And how do I play the video? You do? Okay. Yep. Some of our Reef Trust machines in action. Here's a feedlot mixer just scrolling out a bit of bagasse onto a windrow. There's our forage and wagon over there. And there's the compost turner. So the turner goes over all the windrows and combines any of this. It's a bit of a graveyard for old farming practice, but they do really well for us. So look, that was the easy bit, getting the Reef Trust grant, and then we really had to get a bit of a strategy organised to work out how to do it, because one of the things the Trust insist on is that you maintain production, so you can't just go and plough out a heap of land and all that sort of thing. So one of the big changes, probably 10 years ago, we were heavy replanters, and it was pretty rare that we did a fallow crop. Then we started to get into soybeans, and we were really happy with that and found the ground so much easier to work. But and then we started to see what Alan and Ray, the other blokes around Mackay, were doing with the multi-species, and we'll never go back to a single species. In the wet tropics, you very rarely get to harvest the seed, so we grow it as a manure crop. And we've pretty well settled on that, that combination of the soybean, which will grow to about 1 metre, the sunflower 2 metre, the sun hemp will go over 3, and then the cowpea just climbs over the whole scaffold. So we found that's fantastic. We get huge biomasses, and we now plant cane without any fertiliser at all, unless we've done big earthworks and land planed around. But we find in behind those great crops, we can plant without. So our strategy for our plant cane, we've got this little wagon that when the cane's at the hill up stage, so as up in the north here we plant in drills and furrows, and when the cane's about 1 metre tall, typically where you would then go and top dress with fertiliser, that's when we go through with a little 3-row applicator, and we put in 35 to 40 tonne of compost per hectare. And it goes into the bottom of the drill, and then it gets hilled over. And the thing we really like about that is that each harvest then, it's untouched. And we've found the key then, the ratoons, then their roots, when they grow, they're now growing in that compost area there. So you've got a lot higher organic carbon. So as you take the crop off each year, the compost is still under there. It's got all that timber and getting all the right biota going. And so according to 6 Easy Steps, which isn't that, but hang on. That one there. We all know that when we do our soil testing, the first thing we all look for these days is the organic carbon, the percent organic carbon of the soil. And I found a really easy way to explain it is to think of 2 buckets. One that's full of river sand, and that's basically silicon, so it's 0 carbon. And then think of a good potting mix or a good compost up the other end. Now they're the 2 bookends. New cane land, when you first open it up, might be 3 to 4%. And then with our cropping, we strip the carbon, and you'll find most of the Queensland soils are between 0.5 and 1.5. And that's why we need so much N. We know that you can grow cane in sand, but you've got to put a lot of inputs in. Up this other end, you probably don't need much at all. So that's actually the guts of the 6 Easy Steps, and it's something that the industry hasn't really taken on properly. As soon as you say nitrogen reduction, everyone gets terrified and, oh, we'll go broke. Well, we found the long way round that was the gift of the compost. It wasn't so much its N and all the other stuff, it was the actual high organic carbon. So by putting it in the bottom of the drill, that ends up being in the ratoon root zone the next year. So that's been a real, that's what took us probably 5 years to get our head around. And that's why we are still growing good crops with, on averaging about 80%. So I'll just quickly, so that's our mixed species. I've got a little technique I'll show you later. We've learnt a new way to plant it, actually using the compost. But there they're all going. They're about halfway through there. But we're really happy with that multi-species combo. So this is the little wagon. This is owned by Cairns cane growers, and it's dry hired out to any farmers that want to use it to put mill ash, mill mud, compost in our thing. And it's a little prototype. It only holds about 5 cubic metres, and we eventually want one that's probably 12 to 15. But it's allowed us to get by and do all the stuff we have to do. And I've just got a little video next. Could you just play that video? Just to show how it looks a bit like go into the field, and then the boat comes along with the board and pulls it up. You don't get the compost right, then all those bits get out of it, and you're down a hectare of those. So you've got to make sure you got it right. So people often say to me, oh, well, that's okay for you guys. You've got all these great little turners, and, you know, these are all second-hand machines that were rotting under mango trees, and the boys reframed them, and they work really well. But I wanted to just show farmers that you don't really need all that gear. All you really need is a front-end loader or a digger, backhoe. So I set up a little experiment where I got 6 loads, or there was 2 loads of bagasse, 2 loads of mill mud, and 2 of tree mulch. And I just mixed them roughly up, whacked the thermometer in it, and then, yeah, that's the old loader there. Could you just play that one? This is about a week into the composting, and you look at the heat that comes out of this. So that's just that mix there, as you draw it back. That's already up to about 70 degrees there. That'll burn your skin off you. So there's not too much in, basically when you turn it, you're just rolling it over. Of course it'll compost faster with a proper turner, but I'll show you the graph in a minute. So you can just see the heat coming out of that already. So that's all the microbial activity getting going. So yeah, that's good for that one. So I had a thermometer in it, and I just started to monitor it every few days. The little curly things is where I turned it every couple of weeks with the loader. And you'll see within a week it had got up to 70 degrees. And, you know, so that's a pretty rapid increase there. And that helps get rid of a lot of the weed seed and that. And then for about the next month, it stayed in the 50s, 50 to 60, and then slowly down, and it's, well, just checked it yesterday, it was down to about 40. So once that drops down to ambient, I know that it's pretty well all converted. And to me, it just proves that you can do this sort of, these sort of experiments just with a front-end loader, and that's pretty well what it looks like now. You dig underneath it, and it's still got all the big pieces of timber, of course. They're going to take years to break down, but they'll be long-term fungi food underground. So, so that's a little experiment to prove that anyone that wants to get into it, just designate an area in the start of the year, get your mill mud, get all your other ducks in a row, and just roughly turn it, and then you won't need it till November. So you've got 4 or 5 months on your side for the conversion. Now, this is this new technique. We're always planting our legumes with most of these single disc things and going into the stubble or different little international planters. And then one Friday afternoon, I got this bit of a brain idea that we got all our seeds, and we knew that we needed 40 metres of windrow to put it out at the right rate. So then we got all our mixed species, put them in the cement mixer, mixed them all up, and then laid them on the windrow. And if we can spin that one, please. We're mixing our soybeans, sunflower, sun hemp, and cowpea. We've mixed it in the cement mixer. Now we're pushing it all through the windrow, and we'll spin this twice, and then we put it into our Cairns Regional Cane Growers applicator, and then it lays it out in bands, and our fallow crops grow in the compost band then. Works really well. So then we laid it out with it, and the beauty of this is all GPS. We're at 1.7 metres. We're happy with 1.7. So we laid out the seed. That afternoon they were germinating. It was just so much faster. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 days before we see anything poking through. And they grew out to a beautiful crop. So the beauty of that, you've not only got your manure crop going, but you've also given it all 35 tonne to the hectare of the compost. So that's a good little technique we sort of just developed, and we'll definitely do that again. And that can even work for pasture people. You just get sorghum, whatever you want to grow, put it in the put it in the hopper, and wherever you go, they'll come up. So that works really well. Just touching on last few things. You probably all know I'm in Mulgrave Land Care, and I'd say to anyone that's got big issues, or you're on the river and it's all cow cane, don't be intimidated by how big a project, because there's people everywhere that want to help. And this is typical of our tree plantings, and you can see a lot of diversity in that group too. And there's scientists and TOs, and we have a great time. We always wash it down with cold beer at the end of the day. And just to show you, this is Lenny Parisi. Lenny got the Prince's Trust in between Jerry De Guerre and myself. And this is a 17 hectare block of, 17 acres of Parisis down in the wet country. You see all the canes a bit ordinary around there, and the Parisis got sick of losing money every year. So Landcare and Greening Australia, we helped them make that little wetland lagoon. And just another one here. This is down at Derail, and just that last video, thanks. And the music's a bit out there, but anyway, this just shows what you can do in about 3 years. So we planted 10,000 trees. This was all cane land that had gone feral. We planted our 10,000 trees here along the Mulgrave. National Heads is just right around the corner there. And the owner went from being this cranky little bugger that didn't want to know us to so proud to walk around and flies the whole time. That's about not too too late to finish. Makes you feel good about it. Reaching out.
Thanks, Tone. We're out of time with questions, but I'll tell you what, Tony, where can they contact you if they do have any contact or need some more information?
Yeah, I'm just down the road. I'm pretty easy to contact, yeah. Yeah,
Good on
you.
you,
Know where I am. Okay then, thanks very much.
Fascinating. Thanks so much, Tony. Good on you, mate. Good to meet a fellow mate and guitar owner too. Well done, mate. Happy playing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker of this breakout session before we have some more presentations is a gentleman that we've already had this morning, and he was fascinating this morning, CEO of Reef Restoration Foundation, and here to tell a little bit about his story. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome again Ryan Donnelly.
All right, well, thanks again. I don't actually have a presentation. I was thinking about it last night. I thought, well, I don't know anything about the cane industry. What am I going to talk about? The session's called Growth. Is it growing the industry? Is it growing the cane? I don't really know. So I think I'll tell you a bit of a story and make some observations around my experience and from what I've seen just today. Because I'll tell you what, having worked in the fishing industry for a long time, you can get them together, but you can't get them to collaborate. They'll talk about how to best get the product into the market, about clearing blockages, about clearing regulatory blockages, but working together to do things better. I've never seen it. So it's been an impressive day for me today. All right, look, I'll probably talk about my connection to reefs and what it is that keeps me going, and why it is that I got involved with primary producers in different countries. Primarily, it was with traditional fishers who are making a transition into the cash economy. So they had been providing for their families for generations by primarily their wives, gleaning reefs of invertebrates, and then the men catching fish, and in other cases diving for lobsters and so on. But then as church groups typically want to put a roof on a church, or they want to put a water tank next to the community centre, like that, then they start to demand money off the villagers. So the villagers end up trying to sell fish into the market, and they become integrated into that cash economy. So that transition was a fascination to me. It's where I cut my teeth in the Solomon Islands doing that, during a time when they were actually in other parts of the country, they were shooting each other. Both those worlds went on at the same time. Anyway, later on, I worked over in the Raja Ampat Islands in Indonesia, where even though it's the heart of the world's marine biodiversity, and a stunningly beautiful place as well, I'd dive with Jerry Allen, who's a famous ichthyologist, and he'd go down to 50 odd metres, which is a ridiculous depth, but he'd done about 10,000 dives before he ever got a licence, so I figured he knew what he was doing. And he would come up and he would have counted 217 different species on the dive. He'd work his way back up into the shallows, and the last 15 minutes of a dive would be in the shallows. Of the species that he was counting were opaque blennies and gobies, these little see-through are-selected species, the ones I was talking about earlier on, who are the prey species. I didn't see a higher level predator anywhere. Didn't see a trout, didn't see a cod. You could forget sharks. The place had been absolutely desecrated, and primarily by people from outside of that tenure arrangement, who didn't have the ownership and didn't have the connection. They were just chasing the dollars. And the people were providing the product because it brought them a better life. Where I want to go with this is the connection. I started diving decades ago, and I was like a kid on his first overseas trip, where everything around you is new, the buildings are different, the people are different, everything in that environment is different, and I was struck by it. And the more you do it, and the more diverse sites that you go and do that, you start piecing a few things together, and you say, well, hang on, at this latitude, we've got these species assemblages. When the wind's blowing from this direction, you start making the observations that traditional fishers make about the area under their tenure. Often that land and sea tenure is a continuum. And I know I felt a great deal of connection then. And what I see when I talk to primary producers, whether you're a fisherman or a farmer, is that you're right at the coalface of the environment. No one's closer to the environment than the person who works it every day. And just today, my observation has been looking at the granular nature of the analysis and working out how things work and how you can increase your yield, decrease your cost, improve your social licence to operate, because everyone's concerned about water quality going to the Great Barrier Reef, and all the blame lands at your feet. The depth of the connection. And I thought this is a similar thing that I feel towards reefs, not only the Great Barrier Reefs by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm not going to just talk. I want to have some shared thoughts from the people in the audience about your connection, not only to the land that you're working, but we all live on the eastern seaboard. We all live within proximity to the Great Barrier Reef. There was a video on there earlier on said, well, the water's 5 kilometres in that direction. So whatever happens on the farm's going to go in the creek, going to go to the reef, including his little boat where he's going to go fishing, or he's going to go diving, or he's going to take his family out on the water. So there is a natural connection for people who work on the land. Because you're so close to nature, you're working with nature, the perturbations of nature, the things that people in offices and people in big cities don't understand. I'm interested in your connections also with the adjacent environment, the Great Barrier Reef. Now, obviously, there's inshore areas, there's midshore reefs, and there's offshore reefs. They're all very, very different, and they're all greater distances from shore and require different levels of investment to be able to access them on a ongoing basis. But my connection with these areas is very much a part of who I am. It's guided my, I can't really call it a career, except to say that I've careered from one thing to the next. But it's always had a common theme, and that is I've always worked as a coordinator of people, and the people that I've coordinated have always been totally invested emotionally, psychologically, physically with the natural environment, as you people are. So I don't know the best way to do this, whether I'm better to walk her around or maybe leave it to you to walk around. I'm really keen to hear about the connection that you have, not only to the land at your work, but also to the Great Barrier Reef. And if you don't have a connection to the Great Barrier Reef, let's just hear about the connection that you have to the land. Can we run with that?
Anybody want to go first?
Must be someone.
Only takes one.
Who's it going to be?
The first one over the wall that spills the claret, and then the rest of it come through after that.
Whereabouts? Down the back?
Well, if Ray's caught the biggest fish, maybe we can start with him.
Yep, good on you, Tone. Well done.
Yeah, well, I'm more of a riverman, but yeah, to me it's a bit of a conundrum because we've got end-of-catchment monitoring now, and that's generally telling a very good news story of what's leaving our land, and yet I see industry still not embracing that, and I see even Garumpa and a lot of the bodies not acknowledging it, and even when they put out an 8-page dossier on water entering the Great Barrier Reef, they don't mention it. And it's not a farmer thing, that's a world-class Department of Environment, Queensland initiative, and yeah, I just think embrace it. You know, farmers don't like modelling, but they do like monitoring, and they'll face up to it, and there's the odd hiccup, but yeah, I still think it's a very good news story, and to think it's only been 10 years that we've had that sort of level of understanding of what's leaving the land. And I'll just throw it out to any of the foundations and that, they're often very keen to blame land-based activity, but not always so keen to fund land-based activity. So you've got to put your money where your mouth is.
And from what I've seen in the last 14 years that I've been on the terrain board, having a look at some of the just the annual reports, which is the only connection I really get, is that the level of co-investment. It's not a measurement of in kind where you give of your time, but it's where you've reached into your pocket for that co-investment. And I loved your hand-drawn slides there, Tony, as well, and I remember that period really, really well with the reverse auctions and buying capital equipment, but it only came at a 50%. You had to cough up the other 50%, whereas the dividend was probably not 50% back to you. It was primarily to the greater good. And probably not many people know that.
Down the back, Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. I would say that I'm more of a land lover than entering the ocean. I'm more concerned about all the stingers and everything else, so I don't really venture into that. And it's probably purely because when I was young, my dad used to go out fishing, as he usually, which a lot of growers used to do, and he'd say, yep, you can come with me, and I'd be over there milking the cows, and he'd go out fishing and leave me behind. So, but I think the work that you're doing growing coral and what you presented earlier is fantastic, because we all have to acknowledge that obviously there's been some form of damage and everything out there, but a grower in their own right mind would not have intentionally, like my ancestors, would not have intentionally gone out to hurt, harm or anything in the environment. In actual fact, as I think we have progressed, we're more custodians now of the land that we're actually using. So I don't know whether I can contribute anything further more of that, but if you've got some really nice pictures, I would love to have them, because I paint and I love doing coral reefs and that.
Oh, okay, I do. I've got an extensive library. Look, just building on what you were saying, any degradation to reefs worldwide is a global issue. It is from industrialisation. That's not from cane farmers in Queensland, I can assure you.
We've still got a little couple of minutes. Yes, comment or question, doesn't matter. The more the merrier. Here we go.
Yeah, my connection to the land is that I've been fourth generation grower on the same place, and my son is now coming on, which will go 5. And our view is to leave it bigger and better than it was before. And how we measure that is by tailwater dam or recycling pits on the place. If I've got birds and fish and everything else that are happy in that water, surely they can be happy out at the reef too when that water gets there. That's what I look at. And I'm just one of a countless family that's here. And we're all here for the same reason. We don't have to do this. We want to do this. That's the big difference. We've got the enthusiasm to want to do it. Mark my words, there's times when I've wished to Christ that Barrier Reef wasn't out there. I'm not a fishing enthusiast, but I live on the ocean. And I've got great respect for it. And anything that we can do to keep it pristine, so to speak, is as best that we can do it. We are trying. The only point is that we don't seem to be getting the accolades or the recognition that we're entitled to. Admittedly, within our growing sector, we've got lowest common denominators that pull our overall average back. But surely to God, in everything, there's high and low. At least recognise those that are achieving, which you've heard it here. And everybody here is there's not one negativity in this room. So what I say is that it's a bit disappointing sometimes when you keep getting knocked down after you're doing the effort. And I mean, some of the things we've seen here today, every time we have a forum, we can take something away. There are things that I've seen here today that we've been doing 6 or 7 years ago, but I don't knock it. I reckon it's great. That's what we should be doing. So I guess in an indirect manner, I've got a connection with the reef and at home, and I measure that by what leaves my place. So that's a
fantastic response. Thanks very much for that. There's an old curve called a hockey stick curve that looks like that, has a long tail on it, and it applies to absolutely everything. And from what I've seen today, the leadership in this room is extraordinary, and the progressiveness, the fact that you understand the broader picture, but you're increasing yields, reducing costs, hastening your social licence. So you couldn't have put that any better. But yeah, there needs to be recognition, and it often doesn't come. I totally agree.
Good on you, Ryan. One more, folks. Got time for one more, please.
Well said, Lou, and you took the words right out of my mouth, sorry. And I want to take it one step further, Ryan. Don't publicise it to us, take it to the cities. All right? Tell them how good Project Cutlass is going and what growers are doing. It's the cities that are knocking us. The growers already know what we're doing good.
It's, yeah, I think I've got to finish up. But, you know, regional centres are turning into cities as well. International airports, Coles and Woolies on every corner. It's the urbanisation is in the regions, and what brings with it is the urban attitudes. The separation between rural and regional is becoming blurred, very blurred. Look, it's been a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank you for the opportunity. I wasn't expecting to be able to contribute anything in this second section because of my disconnection to the industry, but just the opportunity to be able to speak to you has been a privilege for me. So thanks very much.
Please thank Ryan Donnelly.